In this video, we're ranking Resident Evil's Tyrants, but not by how scary they are in the games. Instead, we'll judge them by science, from the awkward T-001 prototype all the way to the parasite-driven Nemesis and the cybernetic TALOS. We're going to trace the actual scientific breakthroughs Umbrella achieved and ask, which Tyrant is the most plausible fusion given their experiments? Spoiler, size and claws don't guarantee survival on this list. Along the way, we'll uncover key milestones like the Epsilon strain, T-103 mass production, and the Nemesis T-type parasite system. Leave your like, subscribe, and let's get into it. If you've played Resident Evil, you know the Tyrants aren't all created equal. Creatures that blend biology, parasiticism, and even cybernetics. To judge them fairly, we'll be looking at three qualities that Umbrella itself clearly valued: strength, resilience, and intelligence. Strength is the easy one. It's about raw muscle power, how much force these Tyrants can generate. Are they strong enough to throw tanks around, or just knock down a door? Resilience is all about survival. How much punishment can they take before finally going down? Can they regenerate? Do they shrug off bullets? Or can they only survive a few shotgun blasts? And finally, intelligence. This is where many Tyrants fail. Were they capable of following orders, understanding objectives, even making tactical choices? Or were they just oversized beasts with no more planning than a hungry dog? At the end of each chapter, we'll give each Tyrant an informal score in those three areas and decide which tier they belong to. Dangerous means they're a problem, but not unstoppable. Deadly means they're terrifying military assets. And godlike is reserved for those few that bend biology so far they stop feeling like anything that should exist on Earth. With that framework in place, let's return to the Spencer Mansion, to the first Tyrant most players ever met. The story of Tyrants really begins with Umbrella's clumsy first steps. The T-001, sometimes called Proto-Tyrant, is the embodiment of trial and error. If you played Resident Evil Survivor, you'll remember how grotesque this creature looked. Its skin sagging, bones protruding, a body warped by mutations it could barely contain. The scientist had taken a man with rare genetic markers needed to even survive infection with the T-virus and pushed him past the limit, overdosing him in the hopes of forcing a stable mutation. The result was a lurching failure. But here's the most important part: it lived. For Umbrella, that was progress. The virus normally killed its host outright. T-001 at least demonstrated that survival was possible, even if the result was too unstable to ever be deployed. It was monstrously strong, but its mind was almost gone, leaving it lashing out in fits of uncontrolled violence. In-game, it's easy to see this. The Proto-Tyrant attacks recklessly, with none of the focus or menace of the later models. Then came the T-002, a creature players remember vividly as the final boss of the first Resident Evil. This was the hulking monster that burst from its containment tank deep beneath the Spencer Mansion, a twisted parody of Umbrella's perfect soldier. Unlike T-001, it was at least capable of being guided. It could follow basic orders, it could fight, and when damaged, it mutated into an even more frightening Super Tyrant form, faster, stronger, more vicious. But T-002 had one of the most iconic design flaws in the entire series: its enormous exposed heart. This wasn't some intimidating flourish from the designers. Within the lore, Umbrella had literally grafted an animal heart onto its chest to keep its oversized body alive. Without that, the circulation system would fail and the creature would collapse under its own bulk. The game makes this obvious. When you finally bring T-002 down, it's not because it outsmarts you, but because its fragile biology betrays it. It crumbles, its massive heart exposed, a walking metaphor for Umbrella's half-baked science. If we judge them by our categories, the prototypes had strength in spades. They could tear through steel doors and toss a human around like a doll. Resilience was shaky. The exposed heart of T-002 made it frightening, but also laughably vulnerable. And the Proto-Tyrant's body was practically falling apart from necrosis. Intelligence was their weakest point of all. These creatures were more beast than man, uncontrollable in combat. On our tier list, the prototypes land in the dangerous category. They were terrifying accidents, not reliable weapons, but their failures pushed Umbrella to refine its methods, and those lessons set the stage for their first real success. If you played Resident Evil 2, you've met the T-103 in the form of Mr. X. The trench coat, the slow, relentless walk, the way he just keeps coming. It's one of the most iconic images in the franchise. What made the T-103 special wasn't just how scary it looked in-game, but what it represented in Umbrella's science. For the first time, Umbrella cracked mass production. Instead of gambling on random subjects, they developed cloning methods that let them mass-produce Tyrants in batches. Records from Sheena Island confirmed that at least 78 of these units were manufactured before the facility's destruction. They weren't just monsters anymore. They were inventory. What made this possible was the power limiter. By keeping the mutations suppressed, the T-103s retained a humanoid appearance, enough intelligence to follow orders, and a disturbing level of obedience. If the limiter was damaged or removed, they would erupt into their true form, the Super Tyrant, shredding their coats and restraint to become faster, stronger, and far harder to control. In Resident Evil 2, you experience this directly. Mr. X begins as a silent, implacable hunter, stalking you through the Raccoon Police Department. But when you finally do enough damage, it transforms into a grotesque, clawed monstrosity, revealing the price of keeping that limiter in place. Umbrella even experimented with variants like the Ivan models, which were deployed as bodyguards for Sergei Vladimir. These Ivans looked more refined, wore specialized armor, and were capable of complex coordination. They weren't just weapons to throw at enemies. They were trusted protectors of Umbrella's most valuable personnel. The T-103 line marks the turning point in Tyrant design. Strength-wise, they were incredible. They could tank rocket launchers, swat aside armed officers, and plow through walls. Resilience was even more impressive. Unless you had heavy artillery, you weren't going to put one down. And even then, the Super Tyrant form meant the fight wasn't over. Intelligence was limited, but for the first time, the creatures were predictable. They could follow orders, track targets, and act as controllable assets. That balance earns them a spot in the deadly tier. For the first time, Umbrella had something close to what they wanted, a reliable, reproducible bioweapon. But reliability wasn't enough. Umbrella wanted something more dangerous, something with a will of its own. And that brings us to Nemesis. If you played Resident Evil 3, you know what it felt like to be hunted by this monster. The booming footsteps, the roar of stars, the way it never gave up. Nemesis was unlike any Tyrant before it, because Umbrella changed the rules. They took the stable T-103 body and implanted it with the Nemesis alpha parasite, a worm-like organism that took over its brain. Instead of being a lumbering brute, Nemesis became a predator. This parasite gave Nemesis a terrifying kind of intelligence. It could identify and pursue specific targets, in this case, surviving members of STARS, and adapt to resistance. Flamethrowers, rocket launchers, collapsing buildings, none of it stopped Nemesis. In fact, it mutated mid-fight, developing new forms in response to the damage it suffered. For players, this meant a relentless boss that followed you through the streets of Raccoon City. For Umbrella, it meant they had created something horrifyingly close to the perfect soldier. But the parasite also raised questions. Nemesis wasn't fully under Umbrella's control. By outsourcing its brain to another organism, they had created a bioweapon that could think and act independently. That independence made it powerful, but also unpredictable. At the same time, Umbrella pursued a different path with the Ivan models. These were Tyrants meant to infiltrate human society, sleek, armored, capable of wearing clothes and carrying out detailed orders. They were more refined than their brutish cousins. In Resident Evil: The Umbrella Chronicles, we see them deployed as Sergei's bodyguards. Comparing the two is fascinating. Nemesis was the ultimate hunter, terrifying and adaptive, but only because of an alien parasite pulling the strings. If we judge Nemesis, the scores are off the charts. Strength, enormous, enough to battle rocket launchers head-on. Resilience, unmatched, able to regenerate, mutate, and keep fighting no matter what. Intelligence, frighteningly high, capable of tracking and prioritizing targets. That combination puts Nemesis squarely in the godlike tier. The Ivans, by contrast, fall just short. They were strong, resilient, and reliable, but they lack the raw adaptability of Nemesis. Their place is in the deadly tier, terrifying, but not world-ending. As Umbrella's research fractured, They tried new paths that blurred the line between biology and machinery. One of the most striking examples is TALOS, introduced in the Umbrella Chronicles. TALOS, short for Tyrant Armored Lethal Organic System, was a fusion of Tyrant body with heavy armor, cybernetic implants, and computer control. It carried a shoulder-mounted rocket launcher and was encased in protective plating designed to cover its biological weak points. On the battlefield, TALOS was terrifying. It combined the raw strength of a Tyrant with the precision of guided weaponry. But it also revealed Umbrella's desperation. By bolting computers onto a monster, they admitted biology alone wasn't enough. TALOS was powerful, but vulnerable to technical failure. Knock out its systems and the creature beneath lost its edge. In contrast, the Bandersnatch, seen in Code Veronica, represented the cheap end of the spectrum. These were malformed, one-armed tyrants with grotesque, stretchy limbs. They were the result of using unsuitable candidates, essentially Umbrella's attempt to cut corners. They were still dangerous, but they looked more like failed prototypes than perfected weapons. Then there was the Hypnos-T, also from Survivor. This tyrant mutated during combat, transforming into stronger and more monstrous forms as it was injured. It was an attempt to hardwire adaptability into the creature's very DNA. But like so many of Umbrella's experiments, it was unstable, more feral than strategic. Here, the categories diverge. TALOS had strength in spades, bolstered by cybernetics. It was resilient thanks to armor, and moderately intelligent, though its resilience on computer systems was a weakness. That places it firmly in the godlike tier, though with caveats. Bandersnatch, by comparison, was weak and unstable, barely rising above the prototypes. It lands in the dangerous tier. Hypnos-T, with its escalating mutations, was powerful but too unstable for true deployment, leaving it in the deadly tier. On our tier list, the dangerous group holds the early prototypes and the Bandersnatch, creatures that were terrifying but unreliable. The deadly category is filled with the T-103s, Ivans, and Hypnos-T, each strong and dangerous, but not truly unstoppable. And in godlike tier, we find Nemesis and TALOS, the apex of Umbrella's nightmares. If we had to crown a winner, Nemesis still takes the throne. It was relentless, intelligent, and horrifyingly adaptive, a creature that felt unstoppable both in the lore and in the player's experience. TALOS was close, but its reliance on machinery made it less organic and in some ways less terrifying. Nemesis, by contrast, was alive, thinking, and hunting. So here's the real question. If Umbrella's experiments ever became reality, which version do you think humanity could actually survive? Would we stand a chance against Nemesis, or would TALOS turn the battlefield into a nightmare? Drop your pick in the comments and let's settle this debate once and for all. And don't forget, if you like this breakdown of science and horror colliding, hit that like button, subscribe for more, and ring the bell so you never miss another deep dive into the monsters that shaped gaming history.